Hi, and welcome back to the Blue Screen Brothers. We are continuing into our deep dive into application registration, Marius.
Yes, we are.
And the rumor goes that the two first episode was such a big hit that you now are driving around in a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, that's correct.
Or no, it was about Rolls. Oh, that okay. I know there was something about Rolls, but
Yeah.
in my head, I was thinking that we all was going to get Rolls
Sausage
Royce.
rolls. Yeah.
Sausage rolls, maybe. Yeah, even better. Yeah. So, but we need to go into roles and group claims and
Yes,
the difference
correct.
about roles and roles, for instance.
Exactly. So, because this is actually something that I get quite a few questions about. So here we are on the app registration page. So we have roles and administrators, and we have app roles. And then if we go into token configuration, we have group claims, and here we also have like security groups or directory roles and stuff. So roles are all over the place. So let's try to explain what this really is. Let's start by roles and administrators. So what this is that I've never really understood why Microsoft couldn't just call administrative roles, just name it the same thing in the menu here. But anyway, what this is actually Entra ID roles, just scoped to my app registration. And that is super useful. So this hasn't really anything to do with the technical implementation of my, magic portal in this circumstance or anything. This is purely to do with administration of the Entra ID app registration. So as you can see here, I have Cloud Application Administrator as an available role. And if I go into it, I can actually assign this role to any user essentially. So that's just, the keen eye would see that this is the regular PIM GUI.
Yeah, but it's quite unregular because all the Entra ID related PIM roles are typical global roles that you will get on everything. For instance, if you had gone in to see the Cloud Application Administrator, you can be a Cloud Application Administrator for all your application. But no, you actually are a level lower that makes it seems more like Azure Resources instead of Azure AD roles or Entra, to be precisely.
Exactly. Yeah. So you see here, scope type is application, and now it's just it's populated and read only because I started this wizard from my app registration. Yeah, as you can see, Cloud Application Administrator is the role that it's chosen, and the scope type is an application, and our Magic Portal app registration is the scope. And that means that any user that I grant access, so let's take this guy and grant him access, he will be able to do anything that a Cloud Application Administrator can do on that application only. So I can even assign that eligible and permanently eligible or whatever, just like regular PIM. We're not going to dive into that, but that means that he can have access to 12 different app registrations and be able to elevate to those in order to manage secrets, for example. Let's say you want your developers to be able to add secrets or configure their own app registrations, but you don't want them to be able to essentially modify all app registrations in your Entra ID. That's where you would do it this way, where essentially you would grant them access.
Scope it down, make it more secure because they don't have the access all the time. They need to activate PIM to be able to do
and they can only
certain stuff. Yeah,
exactly, and they can only access the app registrations they need to, not everything. And that's the point on the roles and administrators. So going over to owners, we also have a few. So right here I don't have any, but this grants you much of the same same things, where you can essentially add your developers as owner of the app registration. I would recommend having owners on stuff just from a governance perspective, but you need to be aware that an owner can actually add a secret. So if you have a app registration that has a service principal with a lot of permissions, let's say you grant it group read write all or something, like we did here, I think. No, we did the user read all. Yeah. Anyway, then any person that has the owner role can add an additional secret to your app. And that's the same thing as adding a password to a user, an additional password that they don't necessarily know about, right? So if someone were to breach that account in any way, then that attacker, or if it's the internal guy himself, can add a secret and essentially have the same permissions as your app has, or your service principal. So one thing is like group read write all, which is dangerous to begin with. But if you have much more privileged access, so for example, under the Microsoft Graph, you can grant like something called role. Why doesn't it filter? Let's refresh. So you have privileged roles. Here you go. So for example, you have this privileged eligibility schedule and things, which essentially is PIM. You also have role management, which gives you the ability to manage Azure or Entra ID roles. And you have this dangerous guy, app role assignment, which doesn't really sound that dangerous, but this essentially grants you access to assign any application these other permissions. So it's even more dangerous than the others. And if you were to have owners that can create secrets for your apps, where they essentially have these kinds of permissions, you have a very nice way to escalate into global administrator. So be aware of that.
There are also one more different that could be key, because if you're setting up an owner, it need to be a person.
Yes,
but if you
currently.
set up as roles and administrator, you can actually set up a group. So instead of having adding 5 owners and all the 5 guys quits and you need to find another owner, you can actually use a group and have a easier management that way as well.
Yeah, that's correct. I know, as you can see, assignment of groups as owners is not yet supported. It's coming eventually, but yeah, there's no like protection where it so for example, if you were to add a user to a group that can become global administrator, that user is protected, meaning that it cannot be managed by the lower privileged roles like user administrator or help desk administrator. There's no such thing for API permissions. So that means that you can very easily open a few holes in your environment. So you should manage that. Moving on, so these were sort of on the management side or governance side of the app registration itself. However, we also have app roles, and those are super powerful. So, and we even have it in the GUI. We didn't until like 2 years ago or something. And I think having it in the GUI might help adoption, because they were sort of invisible earlier. So app roles has nothing to do with managing the app registration. But essentially, let's say I have my portal here and I want regular user, I want super user, and help desk or something. That's the 3 different roles implemented in my system. So I might grant different views or whatever in my portal based on those roles. So let's let's first go over to our enterprise app here. So go into the enterprise app. We will see under users and groups that the one or I who created the app has been assigned the application. We haven't talked about any of this yet. That will be an episode at some time or some point. But essentially, you, in a very, very short summary, you can, on properties on the enterprise app, you can say assignment required, yes. And if you say that, all users accessing the application must be assigned either directly or through a group to the application. So that means that I can now take a group from my environment, say this one, and assign. And now you will see select a role is grayed out. It just says default access. And what does that mean? Well, that means that there are no roles defined for my app at all. So it just assigns a essentially 000 type of role. We can actually dive into it. I didn't really prep it, but we can do it anyway. So under our enterprise app. So this is the service principal. So I can now actually dive behind the scenes here, go into service principals slash the object ID of the enterprise app. So here you can find still our magic portal. If I now were to go to app role assignments, app role assigned to this one. So this endpoint will actually show me any user or group assigned to the app. So that's the same thing that we saw under users and groups here. So you will find that my user is assigned and the app role ID is 0000. So it's a GUID, but just with zeros, essentially. So this is the same thing that we saw here. Now, this 000 value doesn't really provide much, does it? So essentially, let's now first.
I would say it provides much as long as you haven't done it properly and created better roles, because then it will be default everything.
Yes, exactly. So of course, what it helps you with is that you can implement an app where the app doesn't support any roles.
Yeah.
And you can assign users and things will work. So it does support something.
Yeah.
But if your app supports roles, then that's a lot more powerful, because then you can actually use Entra ID features such as access packages and stuff to assign your apps. So let's first sign into our app to get an ID token. So if I now were to go to this URL, and let me show you the URL first. Let's do like this. So it's similar to what we did in an earlier episode. We go to loginmicrosoftonline.com, to our tenant. We find authorized endpoint. We provide our client ID. And I add response type equals ID underscore token. So what this does is that it will tell Entra ID to sign into this app. And when I sign in, send the ID token here in the URL. And Jot.ms has a feature where it just picks up this and shows it like this. It just, or converts it from base 64 essentially. So what we'll see here now is that I have signed in. There's very little information in my ID token, as you can see. How do I even know what user has signed in from this? Well, it's this sub value. So the subject, this is me. Difficult to see perhaps, but this is by design, right? Where the app doesn't necessarily need to know anything about me. By default at least, but you can configure that. So as you can see, there's nothing here saying 000 anywhere, and the app just is told that this is your user account. That's it. Now let us close a few things, and actually this one can stay open, and let's add a role, an app role. So let's go back to the app registration and create app role. Now this is the GUI that we're getting now. So we can give the role a display name. So let's call it user. Let's say that only users and groups can be granted that role. You can actually grant other applications roles as well. And that is useful when you're delegating API permissions. Now let's call everything regular user access or something. So the value is user. Apply. Voila. So here we can actually see that I've added a role. It's got this ID. And yeah, everything is as we described. We can also edit it to change the value and everything. Let's create one more. Super user. This grants more power. Ooh, super user is invalid because it's a space. So let's call it super user. The display name can still be super space user.
Super space user.
Yeah. Super space user.
So
now we have our two roles.
You can see in some systems, especially before 2 years old, that then you will see they have created multiple applications instead of using roles.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's so many ways that people have done this. They have either done that, or they have used groups, or any kind of anything else than app roles, essentially. And I think the main reason was that what you had to do is go into the manifest and add them here.
Yeah.
Which, well, if you didn't know about it, the chance of you stumbling upon it were next to zero, essentially.
Yeah, you needed to have an example, right? So
yeah,
and you
so
don't have an
manifest,
example for,
Yeah, in the manifest here, everything is essentially all our URLs, or roles, whether we allow ID tokens, for example, in the implicit flow that we do in the demo now. This is enabled. Everything is in the manifest. So it's very useful to, for example, download and back it up. If you need to make any changes, then you can use this as a reference if you need to configure something similar in a new app registration or things like that.
I would say if you need to do anything manually in here, you should download it first, so you have version 1, and then you try it out. And if it doesn't work, you can easily backtrace your step instead of, because there's no version history in this console, right? So
that is
so you need
that
to
is
be
true. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now these roles have been created. We have waited a minute or two since we created them. And now they should be available on our enterprise application. Let's just refresh, just for good measure. Now let's try to add a group, and you will see a big difference from earlier. Now this is selectable rather than a grayed out value. So let's take a group. Let's take this group 1. And we can select role. And here you see user and super user. There's no default access. We can easily define that as well as a role. But as soon as we start using app roles, then this 000 thing is no longer valid to assign, essentially. So we can assign that the user role and click assign. And you will see if we were now to go to the same URL that we did earlier in here that I didn't keep. So on service principals / the service principal ID, app role assigned to, like this. Now we will see that my 000 app role is still assigned. So that needs to be removed or cleaned up if I want to get rid of it. But there's a new assignment. And here you will see that this app role ID 297 and so on, that's the same value that we see here. So that's the app role ID that we have assigned. And our right page here, principal ID, that's the object ID of group 1, which is the group that we chose to assign. And if we now were to go in and add someone to this group 1, that they should have this this claim, but let's just add me directly instead because it's faster. Let's go and take the same guy, Marius Solbakken. Here we go. Select, add, user, assign. Okay, so now I am assigned just the user role, but also this old default access role, which I can clean up if I want to. Now here there's always some delay, but let's see if we are lucky today. Yes. Do you see a difference? You see this one.
Yes, you added the roles, yeah.
Yeah. So now I actually got this user as the value in the roles claim. And that means that if I were to add, let's say I want to add another role. So let's take the same guy, and how you assign these doesn't matter, whether you assign them directly on the user as I do now, or on a group. It can be a static managed group, it can be a team, it can be a dynamic group, it can be a group managed through an access package. You can also assign access packages directly to these. Let's actually do that as well. Right now I've added user and super user as the roles for my user. Let's copy this URL again and go here. Let's see that the role claim now contains 2 values. As you can see, it's an array. And that means that as long as my application actually supports consuming this role claim, then I can do a lot of powerful stuff. I can assign my dynamic groups which are tied to my organizational hierarchy, for example. That can be converted to roles. I can do any kind of identity governance thing, and essentially eliminating the need for managing access directly in the application.
Yeah.
So one more thing on roles. Let's actually create one more role. One more role. One more role. And yeah, just like this. User. So what you would have seen here as well is that, as you remember this space here, this is the technical, this is the value. So as you can see, this is super user in a single word. And if you go to the manifest and see here, and you can also see it in the GUI, but you have this super user. So this value here, that is what is sent as the claim. So that is also worth noting. Now we have more ways of sending this role claim. Let's go to token configuration. We haven't talked too much about this, but under token configuration, we can actually say to Entra ID that, well, this token is nice, but I want more. So we can, first of all, add an optional claim. We can choose what type. Currently, we're working on ID token. Let us add UPN, for example. That can be useful. So let's add that. And let's also go to group claims. So groups in Entra ID is very powerful, but it can also give you sort of a headache when it comes to what on earth are my groups used for, right? So let's say you grant a few different applications group read all to the Microsoft Graph. So the apps can simply go into the Microsoft Graph, see what groups the signed-in user is a member of, and grant different kinds of permissions based on that. That's not really what you want to do. And the reason is that you have no clue whatsoever which groups that application is actually looking at. So they can be adding groups that you plan on decommissioning. And that's where you should use this instead. So first of all, here I can actually say that I can, for example, scope certain directory roles. I can add that. Let's do that. Let's add it to, as you can see here, to the ID token. Okay, let's actually also add groups assigned to the application. And we're still talking about the ID token. So let's take the group ID, save. Was there any more we were supposed to add? No, let's do that. You should almost never add all groups because, well, this will send every group that a group or a person is a member of. And that also eliminates this where is my groups actually used. So now let's do a few things. Let's create a new group. So let's take this group, call it something like Magic Portal users or something. I like having human readable stuff like this. Let's add a user to it, always me, create, like this. And the last thing, now we can go to our enterprise app and assign that group that we created, which I almost forgot the name of, but it was called Magic Portal users, like this, and add it to this one more role or something, assign. So now my user has several ways of accessing or being granted access to the application. So let's try to sign in and see what we can see. So now things are happening. So first of all, you can see that one more role has been added to my list of roles, and that is because I am a member of a group that is assigned that role. I'm a member of this group, which is assigned one more role. Easy. But we can also see that we have this groups array that has a value, and this is the object ID of my group. And that is very useful. And I can also send this group in different ways. So if we go back to our app registration, let's see if we can navigate back. We can.
So it will only send a group that are related to this application instead of every group you are a member of, right? So,
exactly.
So that's the reason.
So even though I might be a member of 1,000 groups, it will only send that single group. And the reason is that we chose this groups assigned to the application.
Yeah.
And that is very, very useful. So we can also do things like, say, SAM account name or on-prem SID, for example. Let's say you're migrating from an on-prem environment or things like that. Then, yeah, you can very easily have this help you do that migration essentially.
Yeah.
So, and why? Well, the thing is that if you now go to the Magic Portal users group, on this you will actually see that it had been assigned the application, and you can use this to actually understand what your groups are used for. And I'm sure that, or I'm not only sure, I know that this is a big issue in many companies, that they have twice as many groups as users, and it's not uncommon at all. But they have very little knowledge about what these groups are actually used for, primarily because they have used regular on-prem Active Directory, which has no features revolving this. So my recommendation is try to avoid doing things like this, all groups, for example, and also try to avoid allowing your portals to read just group read write all or group read all, because you will lose control. So yeah, I think that sort of summarizes what we've been looking at. Roles and administrators, owners, app roles, and a bit on token configuration. Did we also see that? No, we didn't see that. Well, I added UPN, but it didn't appear. Probably, yeah. Let's address that in another episode because this is long enough already.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
thank you for watching.
Yeah, thanks. Now we know something then about roles that we didn't know before, because it's a lot of easy usage of same names, but they have totally different meanings. So yeah,
absolutely. And I think this is also a bit of the reason why Microsoft didn't call an access package a role in like entitlement management, because there's plenty of roles already, right?
Yeah. So yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for this time, Marius.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.